and welcome at our panel. And today we'll be talking about tropes and worn-out themes. Today's guests are starting from, well, your left, Angus Watson. Anna Szumacher. Marcin Mortka. Christie Golden. And last but not least, McClellan. So today's panel is, why do we still enjoy worn-out themes? And actually it's a great starting question. Why do we? Who wants to go first? Brian.
Do we?
I don't know.
Question mark? So I actually, on panels, I talk about a lot about how I don't enjoy a lot of worn-out themes. But the thing is even when I talk about that, I still understand why we do, why a lot of people do. You know, one I think I mentioned on a panel yesterday was the farm boy trope. The person that comes out of nowhere and turns out to be the rightful king and becomes the hero with the golden heart. I don't personally like that trope because I grew up reading it and I enjoyed it when I read it, but as an adult and as a writer, I don't like it. But I can definitely understand it. You know, it's kind of that. It speaks to that thing in each of us, that little kid who dreams of being a prince, or a princess, or somebody that really has, like some kind of thing in their history or their background that they don't know about and no one knows about, but they're actually really special. And we all want to be special. We all want that idea of maybe we really are. We're not just that kid who gets made fun of for wearing glasses or something like that. And so I totally get why that trope is a thing, even if I personally don't like it.
You said, do we? That's your question. Mine is like, are they worn out? Are they worn out if we're still enjoying them? I mean, the implication is that if they're worn out, they're not something that people enjoy, they're not useful to us anymore, they don't serve a function. I would argue that these things are in some way kind of just part of being human. A lot of these things, we hear the term stereotype bandied about, but a lot of these things that we see are archetypes. And we keep revisiting them and reimagining them, and as writers, internalizing them and presenting those stories through our own lens, our own voices, and we find what connects with us, and that still excites us and still resonates with us, and then we can turn around and share that story with you. So I think that a lot of these things are just part of who we are. We resonate with them, and I think that people will be telling similar stories in different ways, re-envisioned as we go forward.
Well, my question would be, again, it's just that I have written my own share of worn-out themes, but quite recently I started translating a series of novels by John Gwynne called Malice, Valor, Ruin and Wrath. And it's like, the first tome is all about a boy who's not really a boy because he's got a secret. There is destiny and there is great evil lurking in the east. Come on, haven't I read that before? But then again, I said, hell yeah, I have read that before. All right, let's take a look. And it is kind of exciting because, come on, we're all like born and bred reading Tolkien and Dragonlance and everything. We like it. We want this thing to repeat. And it does repeat. And it is still fun.
Okay, it's harder and harder to find another question, but mine will be, have we met before? Because the archetypes you said about are about the people that we know again and again, like a song that we've heard 1,000 times, and we like it because we know it so well. So when we see a chosen one or a black knight on a big black horse, we're using black magic, it's, oh, I know this guy. I like him already. So yeah, we like the worn-out themes because we know them, and as writers we can recreate them in a new way, even if it's a parody.
Excuse me. I agree with everyone. I think some tropes are worn out, but they're still useful. So, for example, the what's that noise? It's terrifying. Let's split up and investigate. That one, you know, yeah, that's annoying, but you have to have it. It works. You have to split people up so they can be killed one by one, or else you don't have your horror film. And then there are tropes. I watch a lot of TV detective shows because my wife makes me. And there's almost always an arrogant guy who says, "You stupid cop, you don't know anything. You're from a poor background, unlike me." And you know he's going to get his comeuppance, and you long for it. And I don't think that trope will ever tire. I made a list of. I'm preparing a new book at the moment, and I made a list of tropes that I intend to include. Hate turning to love, bad guys forced to team up with good guys to defeat a greater evil, underdog winning, mundane-seeming person who has a deep secret and they're actually amazing, a puzzle that the characters haven't worked out, but the reader can work it out and think that they're really clever, like in the Da Vinci Code. And then the two I've already mentioned, student defeating the teacher, and friends who must fight each other at the end of a tournament. And I think all those are really common things that have happened a million times, but I think they're all great. I think they still work as long as you do them a bit differently, which I guess we're going to talk about.
Well, you've almost answered the next question, so. Christie said that a lot of those so-called worn-out themes or cliches are archetypes. So my question would be, do you think that some of them are more common to science fiction or fantasy writing than just for so-called mainstream fiction? Right? And since the last ones will be the first ones, Angus, we'll start with you this time.
Well, yes, because in mainstream fiction, you don't usually have the child who is secretly magical. And various other fantasy things.
Okay.
That's a really hard question because I can get from my head a lot of stereotypes that are in fantasy or science fiction, but I don't really have a lot with the mainstream except the romance. They fight, they get together, they fight, they get together and happy end. So, but every other stereotype is mostly fantasy and science fiction.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought you were addressing me first, so I grabbed the microphone. I think it's more readily apparent in science fiction and fantasy because, as you say, the magical child is a little harder to find in mainstream. But the hero's journey can be applied to any story. We're just more used to seeing that in heroic myths, in the bigger stories that involve the end of the world and things like that. It's just a little easier to spot them. It's like they're wearing a name tag instead of just somebody in the crowd. But I certainly think that a lot of these tropes can work in any storytelling medium because, again, I think they're just kind of part of what we resonate with and find appealing because they've lasted for a very, very long time.
Yeah, they're like, there's a lot of genres that are kind of like puzzles that are almost interchangeable. If you look at like kind of, I can't think of like the subgenre, but there's a subgenre of romance that is like a very specific thing. I talked to a romance author once that said that this subgenre will be, you have to have certain parts in it, and every single book should be almost identical with just the characters switched out. And if you don't write like that, people get mad at you because they want the same thing over and over and over again. And that's not necessarily bad. People really do like familiarity. And so it's a comfort thing almost. And yeah, like you were saying, you're going to find it in any kind of fiction. Like the detective novels and detective shows, they're kind of all interchangeable every episode, but it's just the different, maybe a different crime has occurred, and you're just changing out the characters, and it's all procedural, and you know what to expect. And it's it's almost the same way inside kind of subgenres within fantasy and science fiction, is that you kind of know what to expect, but I think you're able to play with things a little bit more because you're able to come up with a new magic system or a new interesting science that's going to change the world and let you give you that sense of wonder. And so the ability to buck trends is almost maybe even easier in genre fiction because you're allowed to play a little bit more, and the expectation for what you're going to give the audience is not as stringent as it might be.
I've just thought of another trope that I can add to your list, like the sidekick dies. The main character's sidekick, he dies. He's killed like in the final stage, I'm so glad Sam survived, But anyway, I was... Oh yeah, I've been thinking of that because I have a thing for sidekicks. The main character's helpers, the helping hand, the guy who is in fact sometimes more interesting than the main character himself. I do have a thing for that, but I remember that while writing one of my biggest ones, that was światem, English Sword and Flowers. The main character had a group of them, a group of indispensable helpmates, sidekicks. And then towards the end of the book, I thought, no, I'm not going to sacrifice any of those guys. No, they're just too precious to me. But then again, the final chapter comes, come on, someone's going to die. Let's roll the dice. And yeah, I did kill one of them. Still hurts. But I felt it was kind of necessary. It would make the story complete. I'm sorry, really.
You can always kill the main guy.
No, you shouldn't.
Did you say about the readers getting angry at you? Yeah. The readers getting angry at you, right? When you just mess certain things up.
Angus, say something.
So
No, really? No, nothing. No, about killing the main. No, absolutely. Okay.
All right, I'll do it. All right. I'm going to be the first.
Okay, so basing a little, or building maybe a little bit upon what Anna and Brian said, so are there tropes that are more common or maybe more better suited to science fiction than fantasy or vice versa? To just go a little bit deeper into the subject. Anyone? So, do you want me to repeat the question? Okay, so are there themes or tropes that are more common or better suited for science fiction or fantasy or vice versa?
I think you can play with tropes more in science fiction and fantasy because it's, as Brian said, it's less structured writing. Which kind of, I'm not going to answer your question really, but because of that, it makes it easier to use tropes because it becomes easier to subvert tropes. So, for example, you can take the warrior hero and make him cry. You can take the magical, sweet, nice child and have her torture a goblin to death. Or you can take your beautiful princess and give her a nasty case of diarrhea. And that works in fantasy because fantasy is kind of slightly more fun, perhaps, and less structured than your average thriller or detective book.
But what I was asking was
a different question, I
yeah,
know.
versus science fiction versus fantasy here. So we're just keeping the main literary genre.
Sorry, is it easier in science fiction than fantasy?
Yeah.
I would say with science fiction, one of the big tropes that you're going to have that you don't really find in fantasy, I'm sure you can, but is exploration. The idea, because it's, with science fiction, you've got kind of the final frontier. You have space, you have kind of these infinite worlds kind of thing where you may have, 100 different species of, aliens that you're going to meet and things like that. And so it's a very, maybe a little bit more expansive than fantasy. Fantasy is going to be usually... it's gonna. I said on the panel yesterday that science fiction often looks forward, whereas fantasy looks backwards. And so with fantasy, you're gonna have the kings and queens. You're gonna have kind of you'll have more of that dynamic, monarchical power struggle thing going on. That's going to be way more common. Although if you have read like Pierce Brown's books, like Red Rising, he combines the two, space with nobles, which is also something Dune did. So I think that that's the only one I can, off the top of my head, is that exploration versus kind of the more inward, complicated kind of monarchical structure.
Well, I think some fantasy books. My latest trilogy is an exploration fantasy where some Vikings cross an unknown continent.
I was thinking exactly the same about getting into a boat and sailing somewhere magical place, or yeah.
And I'm going to counter that respectfully in saying that with fantasy, you literally you don't have to worry about the science, you don't have to worry about anything finite, any rules that we already know. You can go to any variety of different hells or fairy realms or anything like that. So I think that I hear what you're saying about the exploration, and that's such a primal need, isn't it? We all want to explore. We all want to find something new and to go out and discover. But I think that there are ways to do that. I'm thinking we're using a whole lot of phrases interchangeably. We're using tropes, and we're using cliche, and we're using archetypes, and they're not necessarily the same thing. I think that the hero's journey, that archetype, it's really recognizable in fantasy. It's like, oh, look, there's the young hero from the village. Oh, look, there's the wise old mentor. Oh, look, here's the call to adventure, and it's really a little obvious, but we can have that, oh, look, here's the girl from the small town, who, gets a scholarship to go to the big city, where she meets a teacher who really takes, her under her wing. And so you can use all of these things, but I think that they're a little more, we know what we're getting into with fantasy. We kind of know, and that's why it's so much fun, as you said, to get to subvert it, because everyone's like, I'm in for the same old ride. What's the difference? And that's the challenge to us as authors, is to show them why this one is different.
So what are your personal favorites, whether tropes or cliches or archetypes, as readers or as writers?
Well, there are some themes that I like to explore, and I find myself revisiting them over and over again. One of them is what makes a basically good person go down the path of evil. How do we find that with somebody who's maybe a pretty decent person to start off with? What's that road? What are the steps? What has to happen? Will they fall? Will they not? Will they recover? That's one of the things that interest me.
Well, I have a thing with devils. I mean, real ones with horns and stuff. I've been exploring that subject in a number of books, like in the before mentioned Sword and Flowers. There is a devil living inside the head of the main character, and then again, I'm trying to show, like you, I'm trying to show that devil are not really necessarily bad beings, because since the book is set in the Middle Ages, everybody believes, well, the devil is evil, but no, he's not. He's just a helping hand. Then again, I have the thing with sidekicks, I've already mentioned. And then as we were talking about science fiction, I don't really read a lot of science fiction, but I've just remembered that I'm listening right now to an audiobook called The Expanse. You may know it from Netflix. It was also a great book, but the audio show is just absolutely brilliant. And in part 3 of the show, the world, the universe, the equilibrium is collapsing, and this also has been shown in the Game of Thrones. Like, you have a certain universe that follows certain rules, and then something goes wrong, and that begins the domino effect, and that is a great thing to watch, and probably very hard to describe.
Okay, I think my favorite one would be the hero's journey, but as you said, you love the sidekicks. I adore them too. So in my latest book, I just threw away the main hero, and yeah, but they are looking for him. But if he's yeah, if he will be still the main hero at the end, yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I already said my favorite trope is when an arrogant person is brought down. I think we all like that one. But I also really like a child showing an adult the right way, a child being more intelligent than an adult or being more morally correct. And I'm seeing that more and more in my own life as my son is now 5 and he's every now and then pointing me in the right direction, saying, no, Daddy, that's not on, and that sort of thing. I don't do anything too weird to him, don't worry, but I don't think I'll ever tire of that one.
Okay, so when you are using all those cliches and tropes, whether you have to or you just like them, how do you make them interesting for the reader? How do you change them to make them at least seem a little bit more new?
One of the things I talk about when I do like writing panels, writing advice panels and things, is that creating a new world and kind of inviting a reader in at the beginning of a novel is a balancing act of providing enough familiarity and enough new, where you want them to be comforted and say, oh, this is something that I recognize, but you also don't want them to be bored. You want them to say, I recognize this, but it's different. And so it's something I think about a lot, this kind of balance of, if I am going to use a very common trope, I want to make sure that I'm conscious of the trope that I'm using, and how can I either twist it or kind of hide it behind the curtain a little bit. How can I make it not as apparent? And just and keep the reader interesting, because if the reader notices and it's a trope either that they don't like or that they've seen so many times that they kind of roll their eyes immediately, then you've kind of already you've already lost them, and so you've got to do that balancing act of bringing them in. And making them feel safe and welcomed, but also that they're going onto an adventure and they're going to do something that they've never done before. And it's just kind of walking that.
I'm reminded of a little thing that showed up on my Facebook feed. It's just a little mini movie about a couple of minutes long, and it starts off with a character who is obviously the cliche of the manic pixie dream girl. And she gets kidnapped by a whole slew of other stereotypes, and she doesn't know she's the manic pixie dream girl, and they say, this is who you are. This is the strong black female. This is the matriarch figure. This is the damsel in distress, and we are all going to change who we are. So they get together and they're trying to learn in the real world, and I'm like, I would watch that. I would watch that so much, because it's self-aware, and it was just skewering everything. And it just made me think about, like, oh, here are all the tropes all lined up. What if they all know their tropes and decide to do something about it?
Yes. And I think using humor is a great way to do it. So, for example, the Waco kid in the film Blazing Saddles, which probably both have different names in Poland, but the character Gene Wilder plays in Blazing Saddles is the tired old gunslinger. But the difference between him is his hand goes like that, his shooting hand, and he retired when he got shot in the ass by a 6-year-old kid, which for me makes it, livens up the trope. The other point is, do we have to subvert the tropes? I was in an airport the other day looking for my books, as usual, in the bookshop, and there was only one fantasy novel there, so I thought while preparing my next trilogy, I'll have a look at that and see what that's got that mine clearly haven't. And what it does have is cliche, trope, all the way through, and not hidden or lampshaded, which might come up, at all. And it's painful. But I do actually want to know what happens, because it's got suspense, which is the key thing. I care slightly about this incredibly cliched character who is never going to get diarrhea. But yeah, that is as a point. Do we actually have to hide these tropes? It depends what you want to do. If you want to write good books, you want to sell books, and whether the books that sell well are better than what you think is a good book. So yeah, do we have to?
Yeah, I also like the humor. So if I have to use the trope, and I have to because there are just too many not to use any, I pick the most absurd way to change it. I check if it's still logical, and if so, I use it.
It's probably nothing new, but I just redress the main characters in a way that, like, if there is a team of characters, like one of them is going to be Aragorn, all right? This noble fighter with dirty hands. But then I say, all right, why don't you actually be Aragorn? But let's make you a bit different, all right? Let's make you sarcastic, witty. Right, you're in love? Fine, but let it be like paranoid love or like suicidal love, you know, things like that. So it kind of works fine, seriously. You have like fashion show with like different clothes on it.
Okay, so when you are redressing tropes or cliches, where is that line or maybe area when one, as a writer, shouldn't step in? Because when it's too much, when you don't want to turn the book into whatever Angus was reading at the airport.
Well, one of the things that we kind of have to remember is that there's a difference between people who tell stories for a living and how they look at stories and how people who just read think about stories. You know, when I go to a movie these days, I can sit back and the movie starts and I kind of watch the first 10 minutes and, you know, if the theater's empty, I'll lean over to my wife and I'll whisper, oh yeah, this is going to happen, that person's going to die, that person's going to fall in love with that person. And I'm almost always right. It's just because I know how these work. That's kind of what I do for a living. And so, you know, we all think of stories, story structure, characters, and things like that as writers. And so for some of us, at least for me, I personally, a lot of tropes annoy the crap out of me because I've seen them so often and they're so telegraphed and easy and I think to myself, that's not interesting to me. But to people who don't tell stories for a living, people who don't think about this all day, every day, those tropes can often still be very interesting and very fun and entertaining and, you know, like people love what they're familiar with and they don't necessarily want to have their mind blown. They just want to be entertained for a couple hours. And so it's hard. It's easy for me to forget that I don't need to change things too much. And oftentimes, you know, the oldest tricks are the best tricks. But, you know, I also have to keep myself entertained, and I have to stay enjoying it.
Just to follow up on that, one of the things that I try to do is create what I call good traveling companions. Because the reader is going to be spending a lot of time with these characters in the book, and you want to make sure that they're having a good time hanging out with them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the characters have to be nice or particularly, you know, anything. They can be a little abrasive and annoying, but they should be intriguing on some level. There's got to be something about them and about this story that brings the reader coming back. When we put the book down, we want to come back to it. We're thinking about it. And if you make a good traveling companion, I think they can be anything. If you know, they can be the biggest stereotype, but by God, you really want to hang out with them. It doesn't really matter. Or they can be something completely fresh, and that's what's interesting you. But you need to have good traveling companions, you as the writer as well.
I just wanted to agree that the heroes are the most important part. The story can be just good, but the characters must be great.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. I mean, it's character, plot, and world are the three most important elements in a book in that order. So if you've got character sorted, you've pretty much won the battle. And then you can use any old title, cliche, and the book will work, I think.
Hello, hello. Okay, it works. So we've got like 15 minutes till the end. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, so we've got time for a couple of them, I think.
Do you have any guilty pleasure themes that you like reading and watching, but you actually wouldn't ever use played straight?
I have so many guilty pleasure series and books that I won't give you the title, but I still watch them and read them.
Yeah, I actually secretly enjoy romantic comedies, but I'd never do one.
Same. Romantic comedies.
So, because we absorb so many media these days, they became engraved in our unconscious. How do you avoid subconsciously giving into this sort of cliches?
By doing it consciously. I think by being aware of what you're doing.
I think I just need to drop the mic after that. That's amazing. That's it.
So I heard once, someone said, I cannot remember who, that basically every story was already told. So every story that we can possibly think about was already told some way. So is this the case that, well, the really awful thing to do is they just want to create you just want to create a story that was told, but you want to spin it in some other way. So basically, everyone uses some archetype, but it's the case how we use it and how we spin it.
Yeah, I mean, nobody has original ideas. They just have their own way of doing them. They just put the puzzle pieces together, in a different, more interesting way. There's a guy who's considered one of the greatest American songwriters, Bob Dylan, and he has stolen everything, and he totally admits it. He just steals lyrics and tunes and all these things from all of his own heroes. And so that's sometimes what you have to do is you just take cool ideas and then put them together differently.
Yeah, I think it'd be impossible to write a book and leave out everything that had happened before. I mean, you could have a guy lying face down and a series of animals come past, and that's it. But, no one else is going to read that. So it is impossible to avoid.
You've said that a story can be just good, but characters have to be great. And as long as one already has the characters, then the plot will just come. But how do you make a plot come when you already have the characters? I try, but every time I just come up with there is an evil empire and the characters have to fight it.
I mean, that's one of the most popular things. That's just... there's a reason that's been done so much, is because it's fun and it gives very clear goals and very clear good guy, clear bad guy, clear story, and then you change it to make it interesting and make it your own. But yeah, that basic premise has been done so many times because everybody enjoys it.
And the characters also have their own problems. When you watch the Umbrella Academy, the end of the world isn't their main problem. They have so many mini problems of their own. They don't really care about the end of the world because they just have to live through the day with their own, I don't know, schizophrenia and the suicidal thoughts and all the other stuff.
My golden mean is also to make the main character, or his sidekick, really interesting. Or not really interesting, conflicted. Complex characters. Well, if they have their own problems, they don't necessarily need an evil empire to fight. They may continue their own exploration or solve their own problems. So, that's probably the way.
But I'd just like to encourage you, don't not write because you think your idea is unoriginal. Start writing and see what happens.
We like cliches.
What do you think about making your characters aware that they are tropes, archetypes, or, for example, they commented sarcastically?
Well, that's lamp shading is the term for that, I think, isn't it? When a character just says, "Oh, look, I'm the hero. I'm going to do this." And I think Christie pointed to an example of that earlier on. I think it works in humorous writing, but difficult to do outside humorous writing, I think. I mean, Thor in the Marvel films is a sort of self-parody, is admitted, but yeah, I can't see how you do it in serious writing.
Maybe the fourth wall.
Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes in life we'll be ambling along and we do kind of have that revelation. We're like, oh my God, I'm a walking, talking stereotype. I'm the sidekick. My buddy is always going out and doing this stuff, and he comes home and he tells me all this cool stuff, and I'm the sidekick that sits at home. Well, maybe I don't want to be the sidekick. Maybe I want to go out and have my own adventures. So I think that we can recognize, people have different personalities, and that's where these archetypes come from. And so I think maybe sometimes there are moments when we get a little glimmer of that, and I think that might be a call to adventure for us.
Hi. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think that we are right now in this time in our culture where a lot of those tropes are being subverted because of the culture we're living in, and a lot of things are changing. I think it happens frequently from time to time. And do you think that maybe you personally don't want to do that, but do you wish that there is some trope that somebody would change in the future? Something that you think is actually not a good trope, something that we don't want to see anymore? I don't know.
Well, I think one thing that we are seeing a lot that is being challenged now is the damsel in distress. We are seeing women taking center stage in storylines, having their own adventures, and I think that's very exciting. I don't think that rules out somebody in distress, which is also important. Maybe somebody needs to be taken care of, or somebody is in trouble and we need to help them. That's fine, but it's nice that we're changing that up a bit.
I'm pretty much concerned with the global warming, and now, please. So is Netflix, and every film I watch is about the Earth being destroyed. Or I really lack words, but I wish there was a trope that shows how to save this goddamn planet, not really destroy it or smash it to pieces.
I don't like President Trump. I'm moving on from the damsel and distress trope. We've now gone on to strong women who are super tough and super sassy. I think I'm the only person in the world who didn't enjoy the film Wonder Woman, because she seemed to me to be the least interesting character in it. The guys were funny and cool and had backstories. She was just fairly bland and didn't really know what was going on. So I'd like to see the damsel in distress story move through the strong, independent woman to real women who are as real as the male characters.
Is it possible to write a great story without any cliches?
You can try.
Well, I've got one for you. Trump in distress. Try that. So one last one. If there are so many books that are mostly made of used tropes, cliches, and built on so many archetypes, if you could name one book that, in spite of all of that, is a really must-read, and maybe one that you should really avoid. I can start with that if you want. I'll give you a good one. There's something called Bulgariad by David and Lee Eddings. It's like 5 volumes, and it has everything you've ever read about, but it's so good to read. Seriously, it's so good to read that they've made another 5 books like that, and people were reading them. It's exactly the same story.
You should read Watership Down, which is absolutely full of all the cliches, but it's a lovely book. And I'm not going to give you one because I don't like getting bad reviews, so I'm not going to slag off anybody else.
I don't have a really bad one that you should avoid, but yeah, there are a lot of bad books, but if I wanted to give one good book, I think it would be The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle, because he has the damsel in distress, the magician, the sidekick, the bad king, and the great knight. But it's such a great book, and the language is amazing. The story is just precious. So when you read it once, you just want to read it again and again and again.
Only 3 times, but okay.
To me, an absolute must is The Dragonlance, which is both the best and the worst book I've ever read. It's not even a team, it's a band of cliches, you know. The noble knight, the trickster, the noble leader, bad wizard, excellent, seriously.
Generally, when I'm asked these things, I freeze up like a deer in the headlights, but I actually was able to think of something, so thanks for stalling for me. I recently read Cassandra Clare's The Clockwork Angel series. And that is full of a mysterious young woman who has powers that nobody's heard of, and a secret society, and a love triangle. And she manages to pull out all of the stops, make it very fresh, and make the characters, I said earlier about traveling companions, they're great traveling companions. Even the secondary characters are so much fun to hang out with. So that's a series that I think does it very, very well.
So I'll go with one that I don't like. When I read it, I liked it, but I was a college student, so I forgive myself. I was still young and dumb. But I'm punching up. This is important. As an author, you always, you don't want to give people bad reviews, but you always punch up if you're going to say something bad. And this person has so much money that they don't care what I say. Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code. Da Vinci Code is a dumpster fire that happened to work. Narratively, it's full of bad characters and bad science and bad plot. So don't try to be like that, because the chances of you making that much money, it's like lightning striking twice. So, I mean, at least I hope. But that's my bad example.
He even has his main character look at himself and describe himself in the mirror. I was like, really?
But like I said, that book makes you feel clever. It's absolutely brilliant. It makes you feel superior, and you work out the tricks way before the characters. The puzzles are so weird. Why can't you get it? I've got it. So take that away from it.
So, are you actually recommending Dan Brown? Because
Yeah, I think you should. I think you should read the Da Vinci Code. It's an enjoyable read. It's nice to hate, and it's nice to feel superior.
Okay, so I've got a lot of signs here that the time is out. So, thank you very much. Give a round of applause for all of this. Thank you.